My name is Richard Hale, and I thought tonight's dinner with my son would be nothing more than an uneasy attempt at reconciliation. The clink of glasses, the polite smiles, the strained small talk, all of it felt rehearsed. But then my phone buzzed beneath the table, and the message I read froze my blood. Leave now, don't let him suspect. In that instant I realized the battle I feared had already begun. I never thought a family dinner would turn into a warning of betrayal. The scent of seared steak and expensive wine hung heavy in the private dining room. The restaurant was the kind of place that whispered power rather than shouted it. Mahogany walls, dim golden lighting, hushed servers, moving with trained precision. I had chosen this evening in early November 2023, hoping to reconnect with my son, to remind him that beneath the company, the capital, the boardrooms, there was still blood between us. Ethan arrived late as usual. He walked in with the confidence of a man who thought the world was already his. His tailored suit was sharp, his watch gleamed under the light, and his smile carried the kind of arrogance only youth and ambition could fuel. We shook hands, but it felt less like father and son, more like two rivals acknowledging each other's presence. "Big month ahead," he said casually as he sat down. "The annual board meeting. Decisions have to be made. Everyone's expecting something new, a fresh start." He raised his glass eyes fixed on mine. The message beneath his words was as sharp as the knife resting next to his plate. I forced a smile, refusing to rise to his bait. For years I had built Hale Capital with sweat and sacrifice. I had guided him into this world, trained him to navigate numbers and negotiations. Now, listening to him, I realized he wasn't hinting. He was warning me the storm was coming, and he wanted me out of the way. The waiter poured wine, and Ethan continued, voice smooth, rehearsed. "You've carried the company long enough, Dad. Maybe it's time to think about the future. To rest. You deserve it." The word rest landed like a blow. I sipped my wine, slowly masking the tightening in my chest. He wasn't inviting me into the future of the company. He was pushing me out of it. I reached for my phone, discreetly sliding it from my jacket pocket. The screen lit up under the table. A new message. My blood chilled. "Leave now, don't let him suspect." Michael Grant. A name I hadn't seen in months. My old partner, the man who had once been close as a brother, before vanishing quietly when Ethan consolidated his influence. Why now? Why here? I set the phone face down, my heartbeat pounding against my ribs. Ethan leaned back, talking about the market, about expansion, about vision. He was confident, too confident. The message confirmed what my instincts had been whispering for weeks. This wasn't just ambition. It was betrayal, crafted carefully, hidden beneath the surface of polite conversation. I lifted my fork, speared a piece of steak, and brought it to my mouth. My face betrayed nothing. Inside, though, I felt the walls shift, as if the foundation of everything I'd built had cracked. Michael knew something. Ethan was plotting. And here I was, sitting across from my own blood, smiling through a mask, while the ground beneath me gave way. I nodded at Ethan's words, offering a quiet chuckle, when appropriate, careful not to let him read the storm in my eyes. If I revealed I knew, if I so much as flinched, he would smell weakness. He would strike sooner. No, I had to play along. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I could hear the soft clinking of glasses from other tables, the muted hum of conversations, but it all faded into background noise. Across from me was not just my son, it was the man who was preparing to erase me from my life's work. My heart pounded harder, but my hands remained steady on the silverware. I swallowed, looked him straight in the eye, and smiled, as if nothing was wrong. I understood in that instant That this was no longer about dinner, no longer about family. It was about survival, about a war I hadn't chosen, but could no longer avoid. I realized from that very moment, this was no longer a family dinner. It was the beginning of a war. New York looked honest at night, steel glass and cold air that didn't flatter anyone. I kept my office lights low and the door locked, letting the skyline mark the hours with its blinking red beacons. The restaurant's warmth had evaporated, leaving only the taste of Ethan's rehearsed smile and the unease coiled behind it. I set my phone face down, then turned it over again. Michael's warning stared back at me like a thin blade. I called him. He picked up on the second ring, breath-steady engine noise somewhere under the words. "You got out of there?" he asked. I stayed. Good. If he thinks you're clueless, he'll overplay the opening. Richard, he's lined up 2 board members who are allergic to scandal. He's got a friendly reporter primed. The story drops fast. Then the board reluctantly calls for a transition for the sake of stability. What story that you misallocated operating funds? He's built a paper trail, internal memos, a scrubbed audit note, time-stamped approvals under your credentials. It looks neat if you don't look closely. He's counting on nobody looking closely. He's doing it now. He wants it ready before the quarterly report. If the headline lands first, facts will limp behind. I let silence do the math for me. Speed, shock, plausible concern. Ethan was packaging a coup as responsible governance. What did you see approvals routed through a deprecated admin service that shouldn't exist? Reanimated for a few minutes at a time, just enough to pass through your authorizations, then put back to sleep. There are gaps you can drive a truck through if you have the originals. I opened the bottom drawer and took out an old external drive, solid scratched, labeled in my own block letters. Behind it, a bound paper ledger, the kind people mock until the cloud gets cloudy. I connected the drive and waited for the quiet click as the system recognized something it had almost forgotten. Start with reconciliations from Q2 last year, Michael added. Cross-check with transfer approvals and travel logs. Look at the timestamp drift. I have them, I said. The originals. That's why I called you. You keep receipts. He exhaled. You'll need a witness on the change control flow. Someone who can testify how approvals move. Quietly. Understood. I hung up and called down to security to authorize a single after-hours badge to my floor. 10 minutes later, a trusted operations analyst knocked softly. He didn't ask why he'd been summoned. He knew better. I need administrative access logs tied to transfer approvals, I said. Pull them offline. No tickets, no messages. Treat it like a cold room. When you're done, drop the export on my desk and go home. He nodded once and left. I turned to the ledger. My handwriting cooled my nerves. Meetings, flights, delays, dates that anchor memory to fact. June 15th, Singapore breakfast at 7:30 a.m. Edits sent at 9:10. Ethan's neat printouts put my authorization at 9:00 a.m. New York time. I remembered that hotel's AC unit rattling like it was swallowing bolts. I also remembered not receiving any two-factor prompts. A ghost had signed my name. The reconciliations on the drive told the same story from a different angle. Transfers out of an investment vehicle that shouldn't have moved that day, approved by me, stamped cleanly, as if real life never interrupts a schedule. Real life always interrupts. The analyst returned, breath fogging a little in the cold office air. He placed a new drive down and stepped back. Did anyone see you pull this? I asked. No. I mounted the drive and filtered the logs, administrative events mapped to my credentials, narrowed to the suspect windows. There it was, a cluster of approvals, channeling through that sunsetted service account, briefly awake, then off again, like someone jiggling a spare key slipping in, locking the door behind them. Who had rights to the service when it was deprecated? I asked. CTO. Compliance. And the interim permissions steward after the restructure. He paused. That was the COO's office for a quarter. I didn't need him to say Ethan's name. Document the chain. Dates, times, access groups, no conclusions. Save a copy to the safe and take one home. Same envelope, identical seals. When he left, the room felt even quieter. I laid the originals beside the logs and built a bridge between them, mismatched time zones flights that made approvals impossible, admin tokens resurrected for 37 seconds at a time. If you looked quickly, it read as competence. If you looked properly, it read as sabotage. I called Michael back. I can prove the approvals couldn't have been mine, I said. I need the routing that changed the steward role. I can get a slip, he answered. Someone tried to delete the request, but the deletion created a separate immutable entry. Bureaucracy finally did something useful. Tomorrow. Not at the office. Text me a place. I sent him a cafe on 58th that opened before the market. I made coffee that tasted like burnt truth and started a simple document titled Chain of Custody. Every file got a hash. Every page got a photo. Every drive got a serial number. I listed the room, the hour, the condition of the evidence when I touched it. I didn't write for a judge. I wrote for the moment someone tried to tell me I was making it up. Precision is a harder target than indignation. The cold found my knuckles. I flexed my hands, then picked up my phone again. Ethan's face filled the screen in a photo from a charity gala we'd both smiled through. In the background of that memory, I could hear tonight's subtext, rest legacy, fresh start. Words that sound kind, until you realize they're the camouflage over a knife. I put the phone down and looked at the city until the tension leveled into focus. The temptation to storm into his office and pull the curtain back was strong and useless. He was counting on me to be a father first. He'd prepared for outrage, not order. So I made a list. System logs corroborated, reconciliations mapped, travel records aligned, witness identified, external corroboration pending. Boxes to check, steps to take, a path through the dark that didn't depend on volume, only on clarity. By the time I powered down the monitor, the building felt hollow, vacuum quiet, HVAC, humming like a deep animal. I locked the drawer, tested the handle, and pocketed the key. My reflection in the window looked older than it had at dinner, but steadier. Ethan was setting a stage. I was building a case. He wanted narrative speed. I would give him structural failure. In the gallery, I realized I had stepped into a chess match where my own son was the opponent. The Hale Capitol Auditorium glowed under surgical lighting, a stage polished to sterile perfection. Rows of shareholders sat in pressed suits, murmuring like anxious jurors. Reporters filled the back rows, pens poised cameras waiting for a stumble to magnify. Mid-November in New York carried a chill, but the air in that room was fevered, thick with expectation. I entered quietly, clutching the leather folder that held more than my speech notes. Inside was a shield and perhaps a weapon, but tonight wasn't the time to draw it. Not yet. Ethan had choreographed this gathering with a director's hand. He strode onto the stage first, youthful, ambitious, lit by applause that belonged less to him and more to the anticipation of change. He adjusted the microphone, paused for effect, then smiled, that familiar smile I once mistook for pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, respected shareholders," he began, voice steady. "We stand at a crossroads. Hale Capital deserves leadership that is forward-thinking, unshackled by the errors of the past. a subtle jab veiled as courtesy. He turned his gaze toward me, just long enough for the crowd to follow his eyes. There have been troubling irregularities. He continued clicking the remote. Behind him, a screen lit up with charts numbers and selective excerpts, fragments of internal memos, blurred signatures that bore my name. Funds misallocated, approvals given at questionable times. Decisions that eroded trust in our governance. The hum in the auditorium deepened. Investors leaned forward. Reporters scribbled. I felt the weight of their collective suspicions settling on my shoulders. Ethan didn't stop there. The media has already begun its inquiries, he said, gesturing toward a slide showing headlines. Leadership crisis at Hale Capital. Anonymous sources cite mismanagement. Each title dripped poison into the air. He had primed the narrative before this meeting. Every word now landed like confirmation. I watched Claire Donovan, my attorney, shift uncomfortably in her seat. She whispered, "We can object, refute now." "Not yet," I muttered. Timing mattered. Bursting out in anger would only play into Ethan's script. Ethan delivered the coup de grace with the precision of a prosecutor. A fabricated report flashed across the screen, doctored spreadsheets, aligned neatly with his accusations. He read passages aloud, tone solemn. For the sake of Hale Capital, we must consider a responsible transition. I am prepared to lead. Applause. Not thunderous, but insidious, measured, growing. A few claps turned into a wave. Investors nodded, whispering to each other, their doubts bending toward him. The board members shifted like reeds in wind, testing the direction of safety. I sat motionless, my hands folded, the folder untouched at my side. To the room I looked, cornered, an aging founder silent under the glare of manufactured evidence. Ethan's smile widened. He mistook my quiet for surrender. The truth was more complicated. My silence was not weakness. It was strategy. The longer I let him build his tower of lies, the higher it would stand. And the higher it stood, the harder it would collapse when the real weight of truth struck it. The meeting blurred into a performance of doubt. Questions arose from shareholders, sharp and pointed. Why were these transfers authorized? Were compliance officers ignored? Isn't stability more important than loyalty? Ethan answered each one with rehearsed ease, painting himself as the steady hand, the savior in waiting. The tide flowed toward him. Cameras caught every moment of my restraint, every shadow crossing my face. They would call it defeat in the morning papers. They would think Ethan had already won. But under the table, my fingers brushed the edge of the folder. Inside the originals waited logs, ledgers, immutable records that exposed the fraud line by line. I didn't bring them to fight in this room. Not yet. I brought them as the first move in a longer game. As the applause for Ethan swelled again, I leaned back, face calm, body language betraying nothing. My heart, though, marked the beat of war drums. When the battle seemed won, I thought, tightening my grip on the folder, I placed my hand on the documents that could destroy the battle itself. To counter betrayal, I needed more than the truth. I needed allies. The night after the shareholder meeting, New York felt colder than usual. I walked away from Hale Capital's shining tower, not as a defeated man, but as one carrying a storm no one else could yet see. Silence had been my weapon inside that hall. Now it was time to sharpen the blades I'd kept hidden. The first rendezvous was in a dim bar tucked away in Lower Manhattan, the kind of place where conversations disappeared under the weight of smoke and jazz. Michael was already there, leaning against a corner booth, his eyes darting toward the entrance, as if expecting shadows to follow me. His expression told me everything he had more to reveal. He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were transaction sheets, wire transfers, routed through shell accounts. Ethan's fingerprints are all over it, Michael said quietly. He's been moving funds under the guise of strategic investments. Some of those companies don't even exist. And he's aligned 3 minority shareholders by promising them inflated returns once you're out. I scanned the documents. The patterns were too neat, too deliberate. Fraud disguised as vision. My stomach tightened, not because Ethan was clever, but because he was careless enough to think he couldn't be caught. From there, I moved to Claire Donovan's office. The clock struck midnight, but her lights still burned. She spread the sheets across her mahogany desk, legal pads filled with scribbles surrounding her. She adjusted her glasses' eyes, sharp, with calculation. These aren't just shady deals, she said. They're criminal. If we present this the right way, it won't just clear you. It'll expose Ethan. But, she paused, tapping the page. We need corroboration. Numbers can be twisted. Testimony can't. Her words set the stage for the next piece of the puzzle. Lucas. He lived in a rented apartment near Queens, a far cry from the polished world of corporate glass towers. I found him there, nervous hands gripping a chipped coffee mug, eyes hollow, with the weight of betrayal. Lucas had once been a rising analyst inside Hale Capital, but Ethan had scapegoated him when irregularities surfaced months ago. His career had shattered in silence. I lost everything because of him, Lucas whispered. He framed me to keep his hands clean. I kept the original files, copies he didn't know I backed up. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket, his fingers trembling. I'll testify. He ruined me. He won't ruin you. For a moment the room stilled. I saw not just an ally, but a man broken by the same hands, now trying to crush me. Betrayal had a way of breeding reluctant loyalty. By 2 a.m., we reconvened at my temporary apartment, a modest rental that bore no resemblance to the penthouse Ethan likely thought I still occupied. Around the table sat Michael, Claire, and Lucas, a mismatched trio, bound by different scars united by the same enemy. Michael outlined Ethan's financial manipulations. Claire mapped a legal trap around them, and Lucas filled the gaps with testimony that would pierce through the fog of fabricated reports. Piece by piece, the framework of a counterattack took shape. This isn't just about defending yourself, Claire said firmly. It's about dismantling his entire narrative. You can't play defense anymore, Richard. You need to strike first. I leaned back, absorbing the rhythm of their urgency. For the first time in weeks, I felt less like a cornered man and more like a strategist reclaiming his board. My silence at the shareholder meeting had looked like surrender. Now, it became the foundation of patience, a space in which to build precision. The plan crystallized before us. Financial proof, legal framing, human testimony. 3 arrows aimed at Ethan's carefully constructed armor. Together they could shatter it. We sat in the low light, the city outside humming with oblivion, and for a brief moment, I believed the tide had begun to turn. But victory never comes unchallenged. Claire's phone buzzed sharply against the desk. She glanced at the screen, her expression hardening. "Richard," she said slowly, "you need to see this." She turned the device around. On the glowing screen, a live broadcast played a national news anchor introducing an exclusive interview with Ethan Hale. His face filled the frame, confident, righteous, rehearsed. "He's painting you as corrupt, unstable," Claire said, voice low. This is his next move." My jaw tightened. The timing was deliberate. He had known I would rally, and he struck at the very heart of my reputation, before my allies could act. The room grew colder, the shadows deeper. But just as we had forged a strategy, I thought grimly, Ethan launched his counterblow, a smear interview on national television. It was time to let the scent of war drift into the air, without moving a single piece first. Ethan's interview burned across every channel the next morning. Headlines screamed in unison. Richard Hale, accused of embezzlement. Hale Capital at risk, under father's mismanagement. Anchors dissected my life's work with feigned expertise, while Ethan's face radiated calm conviction. To the world he looked like a savior, stepping in to clean up the mess left by his father. The storm was calculated. My phone filled with missed calls, texts from acquaintances too polite to confront me directly, but eager to distance themselves. Reputation once chipped could collapse like glass, and Ethan knew it. But he underestimated one thing. Glass can cut just as sharply when it breaks. At Claire's law office, the blinds were drawn, the hum of computers filling the silence. Michael stood over a monitor scrolling through transaction chains, while Claire's fingers flew across her keyboard drafting motions. Lucas sat at the far end of the table, clutching a small notebook, eyes restless but resolute. "Ethan's pushing hard," Claire said. "He's bought airtime, full-page ads, and even a smear series on social media. He wants to bury you." "Then we give him a grave of his own," I replied, voice steady. Michael tapped the screen. "We've traced every dollar. Ethan created shell entities to move money out of company accounts. We can prove these companies don't exist. Once it's public, the narrative flips," Claire added. "And with Lucas's testimony, it isn't just numbers, it's coercion. He forced signatures, manipulated reports. That's intent. That's criminal." Lucas raised his eyes, voice low but firm. "He ruined my career. I want him to face what he did. I'll stand before any camera, any court." The plan moved swiftly. Claire leaked the first dossier to trusted journalists, financial reporters, known for precision, not scandal. Within hours, a counterwave hit Ethan Hale's phantom companies. Where did the money go? The article was meticulous, showing diagrams of fraudulent transfers, each arrow pointing to Ethan's hand. Michael orchestrated a social media push, releasing snippets of documents carefully timed to trend alongside the hashtag Ethan had bought against me. Richard Hale embezzlement was suddenly met with Ethan exposed. Two narratives clashed in the digital arena, the battlefield of modern perception. And then, Lucas stepped forward. At Claire's urging, he agreed to a live interview with a respected outlet. His voice shook at first, but his words were daggers. He described the day Ethan cornered him in a glass-walled office, pressuring him to sign falsified reports threatening to blacklist him in the industry if he refused. He held up the flash drive evidence that he had kept waiting for the day the truth mattered. The broadcast rippled outward. Sympathy shifted. Doubt crawled into Ethan's carefully painted image of a righteous heir. Investors began to hesitate. Emails pinged into my inbox from longtime associates, cautious but curious. They wanted to know if the tide was turning, but it wasn't enough to defend. It was time to seize momentum. That afternoon, as Ethan prepared for another press appearance, I walked into the conference hall unannounced. The cameras were already rolling, the air buzzing with anticipation. Ethan stood at the podium mid-sentence about the responsibility of leadership when the crowd parted and all eyes turned to me. Gasps echoed. The prodigal father, the man branded a thief, now appeared before the nation. I didn't wait for permission. I stepped up beside him, my voice steady, resonant, impossible to ignore. "You speak of responsibility, Ethan," I said, staring directly into his eyes. "But what about the responsibility to tell the truth? What about the companies you fabricated, the accounts you drained, the people you destroyed?" Claire and Michael had fed documents to the press minutes before I entered. Reporters' phones buzzed, screens lighting up with the evidence just published. Lucas's testimony was already trending, his voice replaying across feeds like an echo, too loud to silence. The room erupted with questions, shouts of, "What about the shell accounts? And did you coerce employees?" The reporters no longer looked at me with suspicion. Their cameras turned, microphones thrust toward Ethan. For the first time, his polished composure cracked. A flicker of panic crossed his face, too quick for most to notice, but not me. The battlefield had shifted. The hunter was cornered. Yet I knew better than to celebrate early. This was only the second climax, the turning of a wheel, not its final spin. I carried the last piece, still hidden, the evidence that could shatter not only his schemes, but his future entirely. Ethan's face paled as the questions swarmed, and I remained silent, letting the weight of truth press down. He didn't know it yet, but I wasn't done. Ethan's face drained of color, but I still held the final card close to my chest. By the last week of November, the city wore its winter armor, hard wind, bright lights, and faces set against the cold. I arrived at the courthouse before dawn, the air outside sharp enough to scrape the lungs. Inside, the marble absorbed every footstep as if the building itself were listening. Across town, the board had convened a special session in the Hale Capitol Auditorium. Screens linked so the two rooms could mirror each other's judgments in real time. I had no interest in theater. I had come for the verdict of facts. Claire met me outside the courtroom, coat folded over her arm, eyes clear. "We proceed exactly as rehearsed," she said. "No embellishment, no heat, just order." Michael joined us with a slim, weathered folder cradled like a newborn. He didn't have to say what it was. The weight in his hands had already told me. Lucas arrived last tie, not quite straight courage, steadier than his breath. He nodded to me, and I returned it, not a father's reassurance, but a commander's acknowledgement. Ethan entered flanked by counsel, that charged by the hour and cared by the minute. He carried himself like a man certain the room would tilt toward him. Maybe it still would, until the ground changed. The judge called us to order. Across the screen, the board chairman did the same. The parallel frames felt absurd, and appropriate law and governance marching in step. Claire began with the unadorned skeleton of our case: change control procedures, service accounts, time-stamped access logs, reconciliations, travel records. No adjectives, just sequence. Ethan's attorney objected to relevance. The judge waved it aside. "If there's a forgery, we'll see it." Claire turned to the witness box. "Mr. Alvarez," she said. Lucas straightened. "Please explain to the court how transfer approvals route through Hale Capital's system." Lucas described the process like a man reciting a ritual. He laid out the permissions, steward role, the deprecation of the legacy admin, and the narrow windows during which approvals were possible. When Claire placed a printout before him, he identified the anomaly without drama. A sunsetted account revived for 37 seconds, approvals stamped under my credentials while I was 12 time zones away. Ethan's attorney tried to break him, asked about performance reviews, insinuated bias, suggested Lucas had an axe to grind after being let go. Lucas didn't flinch. "I was scapegoated for flagging the irregularities," he said. "I kept the original workflow reports for my own protection." He held up the flash drive chain of custody form clipped to it with my signature beneath his. The judge took note. The camera in the boardroom caught the ripple of shifting bodies. Claire approached the lectern again, voice even. "Mr. Hale," she said. Turning to Ethan, "Could you tell the court who, as interim permissions steward during the restructure, had authority to reassign the legacy admin for temporary use?" He answered too quickly. "Compliance. Only compliance. The CTO and compliance, and the interim steward." A fractional pause. "The COO's office." He placed the blame close enough to sound technical and far enough to sound innocent. "Which you oversaw," Claire said, sliding a single-page routing slip across to opposing counsel and then to the witness. "Is that your signature?" He stared at the page like it was written in a language he used to speak. "It appears to be." "Appears," she repeated softly. "Let's help your memory." She lifted a second page, the immutable deletion log, bureaucracy's revenge, showing the request to bury the first. "Is that your login?" His lawyer objected again. Overruled again. Ethan swallowed. "Yes." "In your own words," Claire said, not raising her voice. "Explain why the legacy admin was reactivated minutes before authorizations credited to your father's account." Silence swelled. The judge leaned forward. In the boardroom, the chairman removed his glasses. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He reached for a jargon that would not arrive. "Answer the question," the judge said. It was a contingency he managed, an operational necessity. "For approvals your father did not issue at times. He could not have issued them," Claire said. "Is that your testimony?" His counsel's hand touched his sleeve, the smallest plea. He didn't look at her. "I don't recall the specifics. You recalled compliance a moment ago. No heat, just order." It was enough. Michael stepped forward when called, every detail of custody bulletproof, the original contract revisions, the steward reassignment slip, the deletion log, the hash values of every file, the dates the files were first sealed, the serial numbers of the drives. He explained why originals mattered, because copies tell stories, and originals tell facts. He never looked at Ethan. He didn't need to. My turn came last. I was not there to perform contrition or rage. I recounted travel dates, two-factor prompts that never arrived, the ledger notes written in a cramped hand at tired hours. I showed the court how human life resists the cleanliness of a forged timeline. When Claire asked the final question, "Did you ever authorize the transfers in question?" I answered plainly, "No." Across the split screen, the board chairman cleared his throat. On the matter of confidence in the current accused executive, he said, cautious and pending the court's findings, "We will hold a vote." Before he could, Claire made her last move. She placed the weathered folder on the evidence table and opened it to the contract, whose ghost had haunted our weeks. "This," she said, "is the original procurement agreement for the stewardship restructure, unaltered, signed, and archived. The copy presented by Mr. Ethan Hale to investors last month includes an addendum permitting emergency reassignment without dual authorization. That addendum does not exist here." She lifted the second document, the version Ethan had circulated. The difference was a single paragraph with a single signature block, mine. On the original, the paragraph was absent. On the circulated copy, my name lay neat and false. Mr. Hale, the judge, said to Ethan, "Did you sign this addendum with your father's authorization?" He stared at the papers as if a tide were going out and taking his balance with it. I believed yes or no. He exhaled a sound like surrender escaping through his teeth. No. There were no gasps, only the low creak of a room adjusting to gravity. Across the link, the board members stopped pretending to be weather vanes and became men and women with spines. The chairman nodded to the corporate secretary. We proceed to an immediate vote. One by one, the green lights blinked against Ethan's name. Removal, investigation referral, appointment of an interim committee with full authority restored to the founder until the conclusion of proceedings. Words clothed as governance that this time did not disguise their power. Ethan's lawyer asked for a recess. Denied. Claire moved for a preservation order over all systems. Granted. Michael signed an affidavit. Lucas stepped back from the witness box with the fragile calm of a man who had just set down a weight he'd carried too long. The judge summarized the record and scheduled the next hearing. The board chairman, eyes on me through the lens, said, "Mr. Hale, we ask that you resume executive oversight pending the investigation." It was not contrition, but it was accountability. In my world, that was rarer and perhaps better. We stepped into the corridor. Reporters surged, microphones extended like a thicket of steel reeds. Claire lifted a hand, no statements. I had no interest in victory laps. I wanted the doors closed, the logs sealed, the machine preserved, so the truth could finish its work. Ethan emerged a minute later, paler than the marble. For a heartbeat I saw the boy who had watched me from the gallery as I closed our first fund, the pride we once shared, before it turned to envy in his hands. Then, the heartbeat passed. The cameras found him. The board's decision found him. The law began to find him. He tried to speak to me, but the words dissolved. Perhaps he wanted apology, perhaps explanation. I would not take either at the threshold of consequence. Not here. Not now. I stood still, the winter light cutting clean across the hall, and made the only acknowledgement I owed him, the steadiness of a man who would not flinch. The room eventually fell silent, and the lies Ethan had built came crashing down under the weight of truth. Justice didn't roar. It landed with the quiet certainty of a gavel, final and undeniable. I learned that betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family, but so does strength when you choose to stand tall. Perhaps standing firm today means never having to bow to injustice tomorrow.